Hi, Crime Junkie jury. I'm Lauren Conlin, and this is your daily Diddy Digest. We are on day 30 of the United States versus Sean Combs, and the government has finished their closing arguments. But I want to go back very quickly just to discuss the verdict sheet and the jury charges and some headlines the other day that I think need some clearing up. So the jury charges and the verdict slip, uh yes, not the jury charges, the verdict slip has been complete. And when the defense and the government were discussing the verdict slip, and they were going back and forth about how they wanted it formatted and what they wanted included, the government on June 24th submitted a letter that they were going to remove a few predicate acts from underneath the RICO charge. So, as many of you know, Diddy has been charged with racketeering, 2 counts of sex trafficking, and 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. And under the RICO Act, again, there are many predicates, and the jury will have to find him guilty on 2 predicate acts. I'm going to list those acts in a minute. Actually, you know what? I'll tell you what they are right now, because again, what happened was the government decided to remove 2 of the predicate acts in order to streamline deliberations, not make it so confusing for the jury. Or if you ask some people, they didn't think they had a strong enough case on these predicate acts, so they decided to remove them. So, what they removed was aiding and abetting of sex trafficking, attempted arson, and attempted kidnapping. But what they kept under RICO is they kept, wow, if you think I could read my own notes. Okay, drug distribution, kidnapping, arson, bribery, sex trafficking, interstate commerce, forced labor, and witness tampering. So, yeah, the headlines read, government drops charges against Sean Combs. And it's like, no, that's not exactly what happened. And then there was the charging conference, which took place yesterday. The jury wasn't there. And the judge said that there were 200 objections in total between the government and the defense as to how he wrote these charges to be read to the jury. Oh man, and he went through line by line all of the changes that each side proposed, and it took hours. I didn't stay the whole time, but some people were there until 7:30 p.m. So it was a lot. And the scheduling is as follows. So the government, they did their closing today. It took the entire day. Tomorrow will be the defense's closing. They said it should take about 3 hours. Then the government rebuttal, and then the judge will read the jury charges, and then the jury should start to deliberate by Monday. But let's go through the closing argument, which was done by attorney Christy Slavic, not Maureen Comey. Christy Slavic, we saw she did a lot of the important questioning of witnesses throughout this case, so I wasn't super surprised to see that she was doing the closing arguments over Maureen Comey. They are both very, very skilled at what they do. And just quickly, just to give some color as to what was going around or going on outside the court, inside, it was really busy. I mean, Diddy essentially had most of his family there today. We saw his daughters, his twin daughters, plus his daughter Chance. We saw Chance's mother. We saw Misa Hilton, who was Justin Combs' mother. We saw Quincy Combs. Then we saw Christian Combs. He came much later. And then other family members that we hadn't really seen before. And also, Mark Agnifalo's very equally famous attorney wife, Karen Agnifalo, showed up. She's also defending Luigi Mangione at the moment. And Doug Wigder, who is Cassie Ventura's attorney, he was there as well. So, Diddy appeared to be a little bit nervous today, I would say. He was very stoic. He kind of sat back in his chair a little bit. He was happy to see his family. You know, he was happy to see his daughters, but I do feel like there might have been a lot of just underlying stress, of course, to have your family there, namely your daughters, hearing all of these allegations and seeing what they saw in evidence, texts, dirty texts, and things along those lines pertaining to their father. I did have a moment in the bathroom with one of his daughters. I didn't lock the door, or the door to the bathroom didn't lock. And I wasn't going to the bathroom, but I was kind of fixing my dress, and she walked in, and I kind of made her laugh by saying something really dumb. But yeah, that's just my story for today. But okay, the first words that Slavic uttered. Whoa, let me see. She said, "Over the last several weeks, you have learned a lot about Sean Combs. He is the leader of a criminal enterprise who doesn't take no for an answer." And then she went on to say, "The brutal crimes at the heart of this case is sex trafficking." And then we saw a still image of Diddy dragging Cassie by the hood in the hallway of the Intercontinental, and that was on the screen for a really long time. She referred to Diddy's employees as foot soldiers, an army of personal staff protecting him at all costs. And then she went on to say, "I'm going to explain why this evidence connects to Sean Combs being guilty." And then she kind of gave us like a roadmap of some sort. But what she did that I thought was interesting is, she went through RICO and the predicate acts. But what she did with these predicate acts, she connected the acts to the other counts or the other charges. So I mentioned initially that sex trafficking was one of the predicate acts under RICO. So she would talk about that under the RICO charge, and then she would say, "Oh, by the way, this is also count 2 and count 4, how it relates to that." And count 2 is the sex trafficking of Cassie, and count 4 is the sex trafficking of Jane. So she would connect those two, as well as count 3 and count 5, which is transportation to engage in prostitution. So again, she made sure to just kind of connect everything in a big circle at certain points. But she also clarified that, by the way, sex trafficking and transportation, these are not just acts under RICO. These are separate charges that he is being charged with, because these acts were so large, et cetera, et cetera. So she went through each act: drug distribution, kidnapping, arson, bribery, sex trafficking, interstate commerce, forced labor, and witness tampering. And she went through and said why the government met their burden on all of these. And she also said, these elements, you have to be guilty. You have to have an agreement to participate in this conspiracy to be guilty. You have to knowingly become a member of this conspiracy or criminal enterprise. And you have to have a member or the person running the enterprise agree that they would commit these criminal acts. So she brought up KK being one of his most loyal lieutenants, and also says, look, you don't have to, like, KK wasn't always happy to do his bidding, but she did it. And Slavic also really honed in on the fact that these employees of Sean Combs, they didn't have to knowingly participate in criminal acts for these acts to be criminal, because the defense has said these people did not think they were participating in any crimes by setting up these hotel rooms. They didn't realize they were doing anything criminal. And Slavic is saying it doesn't matter. They didn't have to have any awareness of this. If they did it, it's still part of a racketeering conspiracy. Let's see. Okay, so she brought up the fact that the drug distribution, that's another thing. She said, look, Diddy didn't have to sell drugs. He didn't have to have these huge quantities of drugs. Drug distribution is simply giving drugs to other people. And we met that burden. We saw him give drugs to his assistant. They cited testimony. They showed pictures, and also Cassie and Jane. And then when it comes to kidnapping, they brought up 3 instances. They brought up Capricorn Clark, the lie detector incident where she was taken to this abandoned building and kind of had to go back and forth for 5 days. She said that was against her will, and it was under threats or under force, because the polygraph guy said, if you fail, they're going to throw you into the East River. And then the second kidnapping of Capricorn Clark was the Kid Cudi night, when Diddy showed up to her house with a gun and took her in the car and went to Kid Cudi's house. They showed transcripts of Capricorn Clark discussing this. And then the third kidnapping incident was Cassie. After a beating, Diddy took her to the London hotel and wouldn't let her leave. So they said that was by force while she recovered, assistance bringing her dinner and whatnot. And they said that met the California statute of kidnapping. And then they also showed that D-Rock helped facilitate this, going back to the criminal conspiracy. And then the arson, they said that was met through Kid Cudi's car with the help of Rube and D-Rock. And sorry, can't talk. And they showed us images of the car. And they also said, there are so many coincidences here. Cassie says that Diddy said that he was going to blow up Kid Cudi's car. And look at that. A few weeks later, it was blown up. And also, after this meeting they had at the Soho House, nothing ever happened to Kid Cudi again. After he squared things away with Diddy and he never dated Cassie again, somehow nobody else broke into his house and no one else blew up his car. So, wow, what a coincidence. Then they went to bribery, and they talked about how the CNN video and Eddie Garcia, he was bribed. And again, we saw stills of Cassie being beat on the ground. And what else? The Eddie My Angel text, and how Eddie My Angel was how KK had him stored in her phone. And then I'm going to skip over the sex trafficking because I feel like that's complicated. Or did I discuss anything, or did I miss anything before I get there? Oh, forced labor. They spoke about how forced labor was actually forced sexual acts as well. So they said that it was forced labor pertains to Cassie, Jane, Mia, and Capricorn Clark. Capricorn Clark, they are tying that to the overtime she was owed. She was owed like $80,000, and Diddy just ripped up the piece of paper. And then with Mia, they said that Mia was forced to perform sexual acts when he couldn't get off by anyone else, and also the fact that she would stay up for days at a time. And then they said that Cassie and Jane were providing services by engaging in sexual services with him. So that's the forced labor. And then I was really surprised at this. The Interstate Commerce, they brought up baby oil and how it's manufactured in New York or New Jersey or something, and it's brought across state lines to engage in these sex acts. So that was the Interstate Commerce. And then the witness tampering. Witness tampering was specifically pertaining to Jane and Mia. And the government said that Jane was gaslit by Diddy and recorded after Cassie's lawsuit dropped because he wanted to get her on a recording saying that she was a willing participant in these hotel nights. And we heard recordings from that we had already heard before. And then we saw the D-Rock and Mia text messages where D-Rock offered her some money, or seemed to hint that he was offering her money. And then D-Rock would go back and report to Diddy what he said to Mia. So they took this as an obstruction, and the fact that they did meet their burden with the obstruction charge or the obstruction act, excuse me. And then let me see. Okay. And then, again, I'm going to go back to the sex trafficking in a minute, but something else I found that was interesting. They talked about the venue, and I wasn't aware of this, but in order to find Sean Combs guilty of all of these charges, at least one of the acts has to occur in the Southern District of New York. And this is Manhattan, New York, or the Bronx. So she stated that, we have met this burden because, number one, Cassie was in Manhattan for these freak offs at this hotel, that hotel, and count 3 with Jane. In September of 2023, she was at this hotel. And then they transported a entertainer or escort here, and here is the records. And then count 5, which is another transportation, we have these records from an escort or entertainer named Cabral in Manhattan. And then with the RICO, count 1, they said, oh, there are plenty of acts with this pattern of activity. We have the kidnapping of Capricorn Clark when she had to take the polygraph test. And, Mia was assaulted in New York. So she said they've met their burden there. But back to the sex trafficking, because that took a little while for the government to sort of break down what would meet the requirements to make him guilty of sex trafficking. And I thought this was also interesting. For Kathy and Jane, all it takes is one incident of a freak off or hotel night where there was force, fraud, or coercion used, meaning Cassie and Jane could have participated 100 times at their own or at their own accord, but the one time that he forced them, through fraud or coercion, that would make him guilty. So the government brought up 3 instances for Jane that really focused on the force, fraud, and coercion. One was the New York trip, September of 2023, where he told her that she didn't have to engage with another man, and then she's on the plane and he's texting her saying, you don't have to. Then at the same time texting the escorts to set this up, and he promised her a trip after this and numerous trips, and it never happened. And then they also talked about how there was another instance where there was force used on Jane, and this is when she was doing this sobriety party, doing it without drugs, and she had 3 escorts, and she vomited between the second and third, and he forced her to go out after the second one after she vomited, and said, hey, you're good now, go finish. And then the third was her at her house in June of 2024, where they got into that big argument and he beat her, and then after the beating he forced her to take a pill and said, you're not going to ruin my night. I don't care what you have to do. You go out there with him and you do this. And then he looked at her and said, is this coercion? So really tied that together. And then when it came to Cassie, they spoke about a few incidents that, I'm sure you that I'm going to go with the Intercontinental Hotel incident. And we had to watch that video in full once again. So that was big. And Slavic said, look, it wasn't after the freak off, but by the way, it doesn't matter if it was before, after, during, whatever. He was doing this constantly over the course of X many years. So this is part of the force he was using on her to engage in these freak offs. So he said, or the government said, that when he beat Cassie and that video happened, this was in the middle of a freak off. So he was trying to get her to come back. And then they talked about another incident in New York that Daniel Phillip, the escort, testified about, where Diddy, he told Cassie to, come here, and she said in a minute, and then the vase was thrown. He grabbed her and then hit her. Or Daniel Phillip testified about this, hearing this from the other room. And let me see what else. Oh, and then the third incident was after the Cannes Film Festival, when Cassie testified that she was on the plane back to New York, and he forced her to watch these videos, sex videos, in front of other people, and then forced her to engage in an FO when they returned or landed in New York after getting in an argument in France, kicking her off of the boat, and all this stuff. So those were the 3 instances that they really focused on that would meet the burden of trafficking. And she went in, to really describe why, like, look at what happened to Cassie. This is why she couldn't leave. Jane couldn't leave because he hung this financial motive over her. He paid for her house. And he would always threaten her with this. And she also talked about how KK made a lot more money than other assistants. KK made $600K, and I think the assistants, the max that many of them were paid were $100K. Also talked about when he extorted Cassie's parents for the 20 grand that he had loaned to Cassie, and if they didn't give him this, that he would release these sex tapes. And they said that bank account that the 20 grand went into, $3.4 million had just gone into that bank account, that one bank account, and that $3.2 million went out. And he's over here asking Cassie's mom for the 20 grand. Let me see. So yeah, I went through most of this. I mean, I will just say at the end, and she said a lot, like, use your common sense here. I mean, the defense has said, these men they were paid for their time and companionship, but use your common sense. You know what they were there for. And then at the end, when she went through the prostitution, or I'm sorry, transportation to engage in prostitution, those counts, and she tied them to Mia and Jane, she would go through the records that we saw, the text messages, and she'd be like, and by the way, you saw a lot here, but I have way more. And then she would show more. And yes, I talked about the forced labor. Yeah, so at the end here, she pretty much said that Sean Combs was able to get away with all of this stuff because of money and power, but it stops now, and it's time for justice, and it's time to find him guilty. So that was that. Again, the defense will start their closing tomorrow. The government will do their rebuttal, and then the jury will begin deliberating. So I will have another video for you all with an update. At this point, I don't know if I will be here past July 4th. I mean, this is crazy, but we'll see what happens. I don't know what to expect from the jury. It's been really hard to read them. They are all different ages, ranging with, like, I think 3 jurors are under 40 and the rest are a bit older. Not that older than 40 is old, but you know what I'm saying. Some of them are in their 70s. So again, who knows what they're thinking? We'll see. All right. Thanks for listening. I'll be back with another Sean Combs update very soon.